Ugh. A few videos ago, I talked about how to find pagan communities, and I mentioned very briefly starting a virtual coven. So how do you do that? Well, let's talk about that today. I'm Liz Watkin, fibre artist, witch and trainee pagan minister, and this is Open Coven, where I talk about witchcraft, fibre arts, activism and inspiration. So covens are a congregation of people. They tend to self-identify as Wiccans or witches, and what they're really trying to do is come together to share in either a magical experience, a ritual, or sometimes it's a bit more of a spiritual support group and a way of reaching out in a community that can often feel very dispersed. Covens are really great, but they're not easy to find, and sometimes they can be intimidating. Some have initiation processes, some you have to know several people and go through a period of training. Some might not just be your thing. You might go a few times and find you're not enjoying it for whatever reason, and so then it might be worth trying to start your own coven. But why virtual coven? Well, lots of reasons. So let's talk about convenience. Convenience is really a key part of virtual covens. Have you ever opened up a book on witchcraft or Wicca and looked at all of the ceremonies and rituals and rites that might be to celebrate the full moon, or they might be to celebrate a Sabbat, and you've been completely overwhelmed by the amount of steps, the tools you're required, the space you would need, the things you're supposed to remember to say? These rituals often are so elaborate that they can be intimidating and off-putting. So if you're able to put together something, a ritual or a ceremony, let's say, that's a little less time-consuming, a little less onerous in the way you have to prepare it, you're more likely to do it regularly. So that's the first thing. So convenience is a really big part of it. When you have a virtual coven, you are able to set it up at the time that's most convenient for you and your friends or for your other coven mates. You can do it in the privacy of your own home or a space that is available to you. You're able to decide how long or short it should be, and you don't have to worry about trying to get out of the house, find a place to do this, arrange everything with other people. Now, for me, that's been a really big advantage. Another reason to start a virtual coven might be that you don't necessarily know people nearby in your area where you live that would be interested in doing it. If you are able to find friends that are far away, then you can then ask them to be part of your coven. And also it's great if people aren't able to meet up for other reasons. For example, in the coven that I am part of, we have someone who has several health issues that make it difficult for them to meet in a group. And so the idea of being able to just meet briefly with people online is a lot more appealing to them and possible. So that's another reason you might want to do it, is because you don't necessarily know people nearby that you could work with. The other member of my coven lives in a completely different state, hours and hours and hours away. So we're able to meet together on a regular basis, even though we're all far away or we're not able to leave our house too often. Another reason for doing a virtual coven is that it's a little more discreet. You don't have to find a place where we're all going to meet. Sometimes I have lots of friends who are involved in witchcraft, but if we want to meet informally, there are lots of difficulties in that. One friend has an elderly relative that lives with her. I have my family living with me who are very supportive of my path, but they don't necessarily practice it. My daughter's 9, and so it's not always appropriate for her to be involved in these things. And so it's great to come to a room such as this, and in fact this is the room that I tend to do my rituals in virtually as well as on my own. It's great to have that so that I can set everything up and I can be part of a spiritual practice without trying to find a meeting place. In our coven, we tend to follow the same structure. It does vary a little bit depending on situation, time and so on. But usually it goes like this. We meet on a weekday evening for 1 hour. We come together, we do a bit of catching up to see how everybody's doing, and then we might do a guided meditation or a brief visualization. We will talk about the season and about the astrological configurations. We will then do a tarot or oracle card pull in our individual spaces. We do a 3-card pull, and then we talk about the cards and how we think they might be relating to what we're going through in our lives. After that, we might have a little bit more of a chat, and we finish up about an hour later. It's low stakes. It takes very little to arrange. It takes very little to organise. All of us are very comfortable with the structure and format. We don't need to discuss it beforehand, and it runs really well. My friends are not even what you might call kind of committed pagans in that sense. One of my friends is interested in paganism, and the other one is very much into witchcraft. But their paths are very different, and that's what's great about the way that we meet. We meet where the other person is. We don't insist that they follow a certain belief system, and they feel very comfortable with that, I think. So how do you set up your virtual coven? Well, the first piece of advice I'm going to give you is keep it small. I've seen covens that are really big that have 20 members. I've been to pagan events that are elaborate and large. They are hard to put together and hard to organise. And if you want to do this on a regular basis, it's a challenge. I'm a member of 2 covens. One is virtual and one is in person. And in both of those, it's 3 people. Here's why that's great. 3 is a great number. As we know from the occult and witchcraft, it's a magical number. But it's also easy to organise around other people's schedules when it's such a small group. It's very rare that the 3 of us are not able to meet. The larger the group, the more schedules, the more commitments you're having to navigate. And the chances are that if you've got over 5 people, you're going to run into issues with everybody attending at the same time. I also think that keeping it small, particularly if you're just starting on this path or you've never run a coven before, it's helpful because there's a intimacy to it. You don't feel like you're trying to impress anybody. The other people in the group are going to be more forgiving, and you can develop a really good relationship. The larger the group, the harder I think it is to feel like I trust the group if I don't know everybody really well. And that to me is quite important, which leads me to my next point. Building trust. It's really important to build trust in your coven. If they are friends of yours, then you've already got a basis to go from. But I think it is important at the beginning to have a discussion about boundaries and ground rules. You don't have to be too disciplined, but it's helpful to say from the beginning, what we discuss here stays here unless you say otherwise. It's important as well to talk about pronouns and gender binaries. Wicca historically has been very masculine, feminine, and very binary in the way that it's seen, the divine. That is changing, and I think it's important that we acknowledge that. Other ground rules might be to talk about no judgment, being open and validating to people's experiences. But I think that is a key aspect to any kind of spiritual community, whether it's an in-person coven, a cups group, or whatever. You should have some ground rules set in place. Sometimes things happen, a slip of the tongue, let's say, and it can cause offence. If we've set from the beginning an open, transparent dialogue, if those things happen, the other person will feel empowered to say, I don't really like how this went. So that's really important. So if you have trust, you also have to be willing to be transparent and not defensive. If you have someone in the group who says, I don't like this, or I want to change it, it's important to be open to that feedback. If you're not meeting the needs of everybody in the group is not going to be successful. People are going to lose interest. And so always ensure that you are open with your dialogue and say, look, do you have feedback? Is there anything that we should change? I do this on a semi-regular basis with my group so that everybody feels like they're getting what they need from our coven meetings. Let's talk about the practicalities of setting up your virtual coven space. So first of all, you're going to need some sort of technology to meet through. We personally use Google Meet because there's just 3 of us. We tend to meet for an hour and it costs absolutely nothing. But bear in mind that if you are a much larger group, you will start to potentially incur costs. You could also use Zoom if one of you has a Zoom account. And the free account, I think you can use for about 45 minutes for free with a certain number of users as well. Another thing you might want to consider is a Discord channel. I've just started using Discord personally with Open Coven. I love this aspect of technology. Discord is a very cool tool and it has the opportunity for you to meet virtually on video with the people in your Discord channel. The great thing as well about it is you can control who's part of it. Once you've decided on your tool, then obviously you need to check everybody's schedule. For me, this is pretty straightforward. I send a text or an email to my other Coven mates and I say to them, hey, we haven't met in a while. That's usually how it goes. Why don't we meet up? When are you all ready? And often they'll just come back and say Wednesdays and Tuesdays or whatever. And we go from there and I will create the meeting. When it comes to the day, there are a few things I like to have around me. I don't just sit at a desk with nothing and go ahead and start the Coven. It's really important to me that I set up a sacred space for my own personal psychological satisfaction, but also to acknowledge to the divine that this is a ritual. Just because you're virtual doesn't mean you shouldn't try and arrange a sacred space. How elaborate or simple that sacred space needs to be is up to you. I tend to include candles, incense, an altar cloth. Usually there's a cauldron because for me that's my most important tool and the tool that I find most valuable. In addition to this, I'll have my tarot deck. I'll also have books on tarot with me. I'm not by no means an expert on the tarot and I still have to check the books for a lot of the card meanings. In addition to that, you might want to consider your book of shadows or a notebook. Keeping track of your card readings is really helpful if you like to journal or if you are going through a period of change, transition, or you're starting a new project. So that's another thing that you might want to include. I do think that having a virtual Coven is a really rewarding experience and I highly recommend considering putting one together. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions and blessed be.